Christianity is facing an existential threat in Nigeria. Thousands and thousands of Christians are being killed. Radical Islamists are responsible for this mass slaughter. I am hereby making Nigeria a country of particular concern. That's a legal definition. When the Christians or any such group is slaughtered, like is happening in Nigeria, 3,100 versus 4,476 worldwide. What horrible numbers. Something has to be done. I am asking Congressman Riley Moore, together with Chairman Tom Cole and the House Appropriations Committee, to immediately look into this matter and to report back to me. And I mean, like, immediately. The United States cannot stand by while such atrocities are happening in Nigeria and numerous other countries. It's not only Nigeria, it's all over. We stand ready, willing, and able to save our great Christian population around the world. This is not going to happen. The killing of Christians is not going to happen.
November 2025. While the world's attention focuses on conflicts in the Middle East and Eastern Europe, a crisis that has claimed over 125,000 lives continues in West Africa, largely hidden from international headlines. In a shocking announcement that has sent ripples through diplomatic circles, U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth declared what many are calling a new chapter in America's war on terror. This time, the battlefield is Nigeria. Today, we examine the crisis that brought America to this decision, the arguments on all sides, and what it means for millions of people caught in the crossfire. This is the story of Nigeria's security crisis and America's controversial decision to get involved. To understand what's happening today, we need to go back to 2009. When an extremist group called Boko Haram began its violent campaign in northeastern Nigeria. The name Boko Haram loosely translates to Western education is forbidden. Founded by Muhammad Yusuf, the group initially opposed what they saw as Western influence corrupting Islamic values in Nigeria. But what started as a fringe religious movement quickly transformed into something far more deadly. According to reports compiled by organizations like Open Doors, the Christian Solidarity Network, and International Christian Concern, the numbers are staggering. Since 2009, over 125,000 Christians have reportedly been killed. In 2025 alone, there's an average of 32 deaths per day. More than 19,000 churches have been destroyed, and over 1,100 communities have been displaced. But here's what makes this situation so controversial. Different sources report these numbers very differently. The Nigerian government disputes these figures, while human rights organizations say they may actually be underreported. The violence isn't coming from just one group. Boko Haram split in 2016, creating a rival faction called the Islamic State West Africa Province, or ISWAP. Both groups have carried out devastating attacks. Then there's another dimension: conflicts involving Fulani herders and farming communities. Some officials call this a dispute over land and resources, worsened by climate change and desertification pushing herders south into farming areas. But religious leaders and many victims say that's not the whole story. They point to the religious nature of many attacks, the targeting of churches, and the testimonies of survivors who describe attackers shouting religious slogans. As one Catholic bishop stated, 40 of my people were not killed because of global warming, but because they were Christians. This disagreement over how to describe the violence — is it terrorism, religious persecution, climate-driven conflict, ethnic tension — has become one of the most contentious aspects of the entire crisis. Secretary Hegseth didn't just criticize terrorist groups and the Nigerian government. He also launched a pointed attack on international media coverage. He argued that major news outlets have deliberately avoided calling this religious persecution, instead using terms like sectarian violence, pastoral conflicts, or climate-driven migration pressures. Is he right? Let's look at the evidence. A review of coverage from major outlets shows a complex picture. Some reports do emphasize the religious dimensions of attacks. Others focus heavily on the economic and environmental factors. Journalists defending their coverage argue that Nigeria's conflicts are genuinely complex. The country has over 250 ethnic groups, economic inequality, political instability, environmental stress, and yes, religious tensions. All of these factors intersect. They say that oversimplifying the situation as purely religious persecution misses important context and could make solutions harder to find. Critics counter that when churches are specifically targeted, when attackers identify themselves with jihadist groups, and when victims are selected based on their faith, calling it anything other than religious violence is misleading. This debate matters because how we describe a problem shapes how we try to solve it. If it's primarily a climate issue, the solution looks very different than if it's organized terrorism or genocide. And the word genocide, that's another flashpoint. Some organizations and religious leaders use this term, arguing that there's a systematic attempt to eliminate Christian communities from certain regions. Others say that while the violence is horrific, it doesn't meet the legal definition of genocide. Secretary Hegseth also made serious accusations against the Nigerian government, claiming not just failure to protect citizens, but active complicity in the violence. He cited a specific incident from October 14, 2025, where a pastor allegedly warned the Nigerian army about an impending attack. According to the report, instead of deploying troops, the army accused the pastor of spreading misinformation. Hours later, 13 people were wiped out, including a 6-year-old child. The Nigerian government has consistently denied allegations of complicity. Officials argue they're fighting a difficult counterinsurgency campaign with limited resources, challenging terrain, and a military that needs more training and equipment. President Bola Tinubu's administration has emphasized that Nigeria faces security challenges across multiple regions, not just terrorism in the northeast. There's banditry in the northwest, separatist movements in the southeast, and piracy in the south. Nigerian officials also point out that Muslims have been victims of Boko Haram and ISWAP attacks too. In fact, some of the deadliest attacks by these groups have targeted Muslim communities, mosques, and Islamic leaders who oppose their extreme ideology. But critics highlight troubling patterns: slow prosecutions, military reluctance to engage in certain areas, allegations of corruption within security forces, and what they call a pattern of downplaying attacks against Christian communities. One particular point of controversy is the Nigerian government's classification system. They often categorize attacks as banditry or criminality rather than terrorism, which affects how resources are allocated and how seriously the international community takes the threat. There's also a political dimension. Nigeria is split roughly 50-50 between Muslims, who dominate the north, and Christians, who are majority in the south. Some analysts worry that outside intervention framed primarily around protecting Christians could inflame these existing tensions and potentially push the country toward even greater division. This brings us to the controversial American response. The U.S. hasn't been completely absent from Nigeria's security situation. For years, America has provided training, intelligence sharing, and equipment to Nigerian forces. But Secretary Hegseth's announcement signals something dramatically different. Here's what has changed. First, President Trump redesignated Nigeria as a country of particular concern for religious freedom violations. This is a formal designation under U.S. law that comes with potential sanctions and restrictions. This isn't the first time. The Trump administration made this designation in December 2020. The Biden administration removed it in November 2021, arguing that engagement rather than punishment would be more effective. Clearly, the current administration disagrees. Second, all military and financial aid to the Nigerian government has been suspended. This is significant. In recent years, the U.S. has provided hundreds of millions of dollars in security assistance. Third, and most controversially, the Secretary announced that the Department of Defense is preparing operational plans to protect Christians and eliminate terrorist organizations. What does operational plans actually mean? The statement doesn't specify, but options could include intelligence and surveillance support, drone strikes against terrorist leaders, training and equipping local militias or community defense forces, special operations deployments, logistical support for regional African forces, or in the most extreme scenario, direct U.S. military intervention. The deliberately vague language has sparked intense speculation and concern. The international response has been mixed. Some religious freedom advocates and Christian organizations have praised the decision as finally taking the crisis seriously. But many diplomats, foreign policy experts, and African leaders have expressed alarm. The African Union issued a statement emphasizing African solutions to African problems. The United Nations called for all parties to respect Nigeria's sovereignty. European allies have been notably quiet, perhaps unsure how to respond to such an aggressive unilateral American stance. There's also the question of legal authority. Under international law, military action on another country's soil requires either that country's consent, UN Security Council authorization, or a valid claim of self-defense. None of these clearly apply here. Secretary Hegseth's statement that America will act with or without permission from the Nigerian government has raised serious questions about international norms and the rules-based order that the U.S. typically claims to defend. Behind the immediate policy debate lie deeper questions about America's role in the world. Secretary Hegseth invoked the Crusades, saying that just as medieval warriors defended Christian pilgrims, America should defend persecuted Christians today. He explicitly embraced labels like Christian nationalist and said he's proud to impose American values. This rhetoric represents a significant shift from how American foreign policy has traditionally been justified. Usually, interventions are framed in universal terms: human rights, democracy, international law. Rarely do officials explicitly frame military action in religious terms. Supporters argue this is honest. They say America's values are rooted in Judeo-Christian tradition, and there's nothing wrong with acknowledging that and acting accordingly. They point out that Christian persecution is a real problem in many parts of the world, and someone needs to stand up for these communities. Critics warn this approach is dangerous. They argue that framing foreign policy in religious terms risks turning conflicts into religious wars, makes diplomatic solutions harder, could inspire more extremism rather than less, violates principles of secular governance, and could be used to justify almost any intervention anywhere. There's also the question of consistency. If America intervenes to protect Christians in Nigeria, what about Rohingya Muslims facing persecution in Myanmar, Uyghur Muslims in Chinese detention camps, Yazidis who were targeted by ISIS, or other religious minorities facing violence worldwide? Will America intervene in all these cases? And if not, how do we decide which victims deserve protection and which don't? Beyond the philosophical debates, there are practical questions. Can military force actually solve this problem? The U.S. spent 20 years fighting the Taliban in Afghanistan with the world's most powerful military. The Taliban now controls Afghanistan. Boko Haram and ISWAP don't hold territory like a conventional army. They blend into local populations, operate across porous borders, and recruit from desperate, impoverished communities. How do you defeat that with drones and special forces? And what about unintended consequences? Could American military action rally more recruits to extremist groups, destabilize the Nigerian government further, trigger a wider regional conflict, create an anti-American backlash among Nigerian Muslims, or lead to civilian casualties that undermine the mission's stated purpose? These aren't hypothetical concerns. They're lessons from decades of American military interventions that had noble goals but complex, often tragic outcomes. What often gets lost in policy debates are the voices of the people actually living through this crisis. Nigerian Christians in affected areas describe living in constant fear. Villages emptied, churches abandoned, children unable to attend school. Some welcome any help, including American intervention. Others worry it will make them bigger targets. Muslim community leaders, even those who strongly oppose Boko Haram and ISWAP, express concern about how American military action might affect them. They worry about becoming casualties of drone strikes or facing increased suspicion and discrimination. Nigerian civil society organizations have been working on the ground for years, providing humanitarian aid, facilitating dialogue between communities, and documenting abuses. Many feel their efforts are being overlooked in favor of military solutions. Religious leaders from both faiths who have been promoting interfaith dialogue worry that outside intervention framed in religious terms will undermine their work and deepen divisions. There's also the question of what Nigerian citizens actually want. Opinion polls show Nigerians frustrated with their government's security failures, but also wary of foreign military intervention. Many Nigerians remember when external powers drew their borders, colonized their land, and extracted their resources. The concern isn't just about sovereignty in an abstract sense. It's about whether outside powers truly understand local contexts, and whether interventions designed in Washington will actually help people in Maiduguri or Jos. As we speak, the situation continues to develop. The operational plans Secretary Hegseth mentioned are still being formulated. The Nigerian government is consulting with regional partners on how to respond. International organizations are urging dialogue and de-escalation. What's clear is that a genuine humanitarian crisis exists in Nigeria. People are dying, communities are suffering, and previous approaches haven't solved the problem. What's less clear is whether this bold new American approach will help or hurt, whether it will protect the vulnerable or put them in greater danger, and whether it represents a sustainable foreign policy or a dangerous precedent. The only certainty is that decisions made in the coming weeks and months will affect millions of lives across West Africa and potentially reshape how America engages with the world. One thing Secretary Hegseth said in his statement is undeniably true. History will judge this moment. What that judgment will be remains to be seen. What do you think? Is increased U.S. involvement the right approach to addressing terrorism and religious persecution in Nigeria? Or are there concerns about sovereignty and unintended consequences? Share your thoughtful perspectives in the comments below. And if you've watched up to this moment, please subscribe and leave us a comment. These videos take a lot to create, but your support keeps us going. See you in the next one.